It began like any other summer day, ordinary in every way. The chatter of parents filled the air, children's laughter spilled out onto the street, and the faint thrum of pop music drifted from the local dance studio. But lurking just beyond the surface of this peaceful scene was a quiet, unrelenting storm. A figure approached, unnoticed and unremarkable at first glance, yet carrying with him a darkness that would soon consume everything in its path. What unfolded next would strip away Southport's innocence, forever. Axel Rudakubana. A name once whispered by teachers in staff rooms, muttered by concerned neighbors, and now emblazoned across headlines in bold letters. Axel was not born a monster, but something had been lost, or broken, along the way. The story of his life reads like a series of unheeded warnings, a grim descent into darkness that, in hindsight, seems painfully avoidable. Axel's early life was a mosaic of chaos and neglect. Born to immigrant parents fleeing violence in East Africa, his childhood was marred by instability. His father, a laborer who worked long hours, struggled with alcoholism, while his mother juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Home was not a sanctuary but a battlefield, where shouting matches and slammed doors became the soundtrack of Axel's formative years. By the time he was 7, Axel had already begun to exhibit troubling behavior. Teachers noted his violent outbursts, throwing chairs when frustrated, hitting classmates over minor disagreements, and drawing disturbingly graphic images of destruction in his notebooks. His artwork often depicted cities in flames, shadowy figures holding knives, and wide-eyed faces frozen in terror. At home, Axel's demeanor was equally alarming. He was withdrawn, often disappearing for hours into his room, where he hoarded knives and other sharp objects. His parents dismissed it as a phase, blaming his behavior on the stress of their immigration struggles. When neighbors expressed concern about Axel torturing stray animals in the alleyways, his father brushed it off with a wave of the hand, muttering, "Boys will be boys." But boys like Axel don't simply grow out of such behavior. They grow into it. Axel's personality bore all the hallmarks of a deep psychological fracture. Early signs of conduct disorder, a childhood condition marked by aggressive, destructive, and deceitful behaviors, were glaringly evident. The absence of early intervention allowed these tendencies to harden into something far more dangerous. One recurring theme in Axel's life was his inability to form meaningful connections. Psychologists call this attachment disruption, a condition often seen in children raised in chaotic or neglectful environments. Axel's emotional needs went unmet, leaving him with a void that he sought to fill through dominance and control, a dangerous foundation for violent behavior. His fascination with violence can be attributed to a desensitization to human suffering, compounded by a lack of empathy. Whether it was due to his turbulent upbringing or a latent predisposition, Axel appeared to view others not as people but as obstacles or objects. His tendency to harm animals, a known precursor to more severe violence, was a chilling indicator of his moral disengagement. By the time he reached his teenage years, Axel had developed traits associated with antisocial personality disorder. He was manipulative, impulsive, and wholly unremorseful. What made him particularly dangerous, however, was his intelligence. He could charm when it suited him, lulling those around him into a false sense of security. Beneath the surface, a darker force churned, a calculated and growing rage. The warnings were there, loud, persistent, and undeniable. Teachers flagged his behavior, neighbors reported their fears, and even his peers avoided him, describing him as scary and unpredictable. But the cracks in the system were too wide, and Axel slipped through unnoticed. What pushed him over the edge remains a subject of speculation. Was it the relentless bullying he endured in school, where his accent and poverty made him an easy target? Was it the unresolved trauma from his parents' violent fights? Or was it simply the culmination of years of unchecked rage? The morning of July 17th began like any other in Southport. The soft cries of seagulls mingled with the rhythmic crashing of waves, and the cobblestone streets glistened faintly from a passing drizzle. The town, with its quaint charm and familiar faces, was a place where routine reigned supreme. Children played along the promenade, their carefree laughter rising above the hum of the ocean, while parents sipped coffee at the corner cafe. It was a place where life felt safe, predictable, until it wasn't. In the weeks leading up to that fateful day, Axel Rudakubana had begun haunting the streets of Southport with a quiet, unsettling presence. At 17, Axel was an outsider in every sense of the word. His tall, wiry frame and sullen expression made him blend into the background, but his mind was far from quiet. A former student at the local high school, Axel's name was vaguely familiar to many in town, though few had spoken to him. He had once been a boy who loved sketching and playing video games, but those memories had faded into obscurity as his behavior grew darker. Axel had been expelled from school 6 months earlier for an altercation that spiraled out of control. His teachers described him as intelligent but volatile, a young man carrying the weight of deep anger and isolation. After his expulsion, he disappeared from the structured world of classrooms and hallways, retreating instead to the shadowy corners of the internet. There, he found a sense of belonging, but not in a way anyone would have hoped. He immersed himself in forums and videos that glorified violence, studied the lives of mass attackers, and fed the twisted narrative that the world owed him something it had refused to give. But Axel's connection to the dance studio wasn't entirely random. He had walked past it many times on his aimless strolls through Southport. The sound of music and laughter spilling from its windows grated against him, a cruel reminder of the joy and innocence he had never known. Among the students was his younger half-sister, 8-year-old Mia, though she didn't know him well. She was the product of his father's second marriage, a family Axel felt had replaced him without a second thought. Watching Mia walk into that studio week after week, carefree and adored, fanned the flames of resentment burning inside him. The day before the attack, Axel lingered outside the studio for hours, his hood pulled low, his gaze fixed on the bustling activity inside. He didn't go unnoticed. Leanne Lucas, the dance instructor, saw him through the window and felt a pang of unease. She mentioned it casually to a parent, dismissing it as paranoia. Probably just a shy teenager, she said, brushing off the strange encounter. But Axel wasn't shy, he was planning. That night, in the suffocating solitude of his small, cluttered bedroom, he packed a bag with everything he needed. His thoughts were consumed with a singular purpose, to make them all feel his pain. The knife, sharp and heavy, sat ominously on his desk as he stared at it. In his mind, he wasn't the villain. He was the misunderstood outcast exacting justice on a world that had turned its back on him. The morning of July 17th came quickly. Axel barely slept, the adrenaline coursing through him too strong to ignore. As the town awoke, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, he pulled on his dark hoodie and slung the bag over his shoulder. With every step toward the studio, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just walking down the quiet street, he was marching toward infamy. Inside the studio, the atmosphere was jubilant. Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off" blared from the speakers as dozens of little girls twirled in glittering costumes. Parents smiled from the sidelines, snapping photos and cheering on their children. Among them was Mia, her ponytail bouncing as she laughed with her best friend, Alice Da Silva Aguiar. The two were inseparable, their joy contagious as they tried to perfect their spins. Axel reached the studio doors and paused. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, his face pale and tight with tension. He felt the weight of the bag on his shoulder, the knife inside pressing against him like a cruel reminder of what he was about to do. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his mind, a tiny, almost imperceptible voice whispering that he could still turn back. But the rage, the deep, unrelenting rage, swallowed that voice whole. When Axel opened the door, it was as if the world held its breath. The music faltered, the laughter stilled, and every pair of eyes turned toward him. Leanne was the first to sense the danger. Something in the way he stood, rigid, unblinking, sent a chill down her spine. "Hi there," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "Can I help you?" Axel didn't respond. His hands trembled as they reached for the strap of his bag, his face unreadable. Then, with a sudden, startling motion, he pulled out the knife, its blade catching the light in a way that made the room seem impossibly bright. Panic erupted. Children screamed, parents surged forward, and Leanne, acting on pure instinct, stepped in front of her students. "Run!" she shouted, her voice breaking with urgency. Axel's movements were swift and calculated. His first target was Alice, her bright pink tutu crumpling as she fell. The sight sent MIA into a state of frozen shock, her feet rooted to the floor even as her friends fled around her. Axel's gaze landed on her next, a brief moment of recognition passing between them before he moved. Leanne fought valiantly, shielding as many children as she could while screaming for help. Outside, John Hayes heard the chaos and rushed in, his courage outweighing his fear. He tackled Axel to the ground, giving several children the chance to escape, but the fight was brutal. Axel lashed out with terrifying strength, his blade finding its mark again and again. By the time the police arrived, the studio was unrecognizable. Glitter and blood stained the floor, the once bright room dimmed by the weight of unimaginable grief. Axel was dragged away, his expression eerily calm as he looked back at the destruction he had caused. Southport would never be the same. The dance studio, once a beacon of joy, became a symbol of pain and loss. And for MIA, who survived but lost her best friend, the scars, both visible and invisible, would remain forever. Axel was arrested on March 5th, just hours after the devastating attack that claimed the lives of Alice Da Silva Aguiar, Elsie Stankham, and BB King. Police apprehended him at his home following a swift investigation that linked him to the scene of the crime. By then, the details of the tragedy had begun to emerge, and Southport was reeling from the unthinkable loss of 3 young lives. In the weeks following his arrest, investigators pieced together a chilling timeline. Axel's actions on the day of the attack were calculated, the culmination of months of planning fueled by disturbing online activity and escalating warning signs. His internet history revealed searches related to weapons, attack strategies, and extremist ideologies. Despite numerous red flags in the months leading up to the tragedy, violent outbursts, threatening social media posts, and reports from concerned neighbors, interventions either fell short or never materialized. The attack on March 5th shocked Southport to its core. Alice, a curious and intelligent 9-year-old with dreams of becoming a scientist, had been rehearsing for a school showcase at the dance studio that day. Elsie, 7, a joyful and lively child who brightened every room she entered, had joined the practice alongside her best friend, BB. At just 6 years old, BB adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. The 3 girls were inseparable and full of life until that fateful day. The trial began on November 12th, 8 months after the arrest, and quickly became a focal point for the nation. Axel faced charges of premeditated murder and terrorism-related offenses, as prosecutors laid out the grim details of his intentions. The evidence revealed a deeply troubled young man who had been on a path of destruction for years. Witnesses spoke of his troubling behavior, while experts testified about the glaring gaps in the systems meant to monitor and support at-risk individuals. Judge Julian Goose, presiding over the case, described the crime as the most extreme, shocking, and exceptionally serious he had encountered. On December 20th, Axel was sentenced to 52 years in prison. The judge acknowledged the limits imposed by Axel's age at the time of the crime, which precluded a life sentence without parole, though he noted that Axel was unlikely ever to be released. The tragedy prompted widespread outrage and calls for accountability. A public inquiry was launched in January to investigate the systemic failures that allowed Axel's behavior to escalate unchecked. Early findings pointed to insufficient mental health services, lack of coordination between law enforcement and social services, and missed opportunities for intervention in schools. Advocates argued that with better resources and earlier action, the attack could have been prevented. For the families of Alice, Elsie, and BB, no inquiry could undo the pain of losing their children. Each family has channeled their grief into activism, establishing foundations in their children's names to support education, mental health awareness, and community safety. They hope to prevent other families from enduring similar tragedies and ensure that the memories of their children inspire lasting change. Axel's story is a stark reminder of the consequences of systemic neglect and the cost of ignoring warning signs. For Southport, the scars of March 5th remain, a painful symbol of innocence lost. Yet, amid the heartbreak, the community has found strength, rallying together to honor the lives taken too soon and to demand a future where no cries for help go unanswered.
Thank you for watching. This is Darkly Wired, where we uncover the darkest true crime stories and the lessons they leave behind. Tragedies like Southport force us to ask, how do we spot the warning signs before it's too late? How do we turn grief into action? Alice, Elsie, and Bibi deserved a future. Their memory must drive change. We must stay vigilant, speak up, and protect the vulnerable before another life is lost. For more deep dives into shocking crimes, unsolved mysteries, and the hidden truths behind them, subscribe to Darkly Wired. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications, because every story holds a lesson. Bye for now.